Welcome back to another virtual Family Saturday. While we wish you were here in person at the Bowdoin College Museum of Art, we are happy to join you virtually. In this Family Saturday, we will be visiting the online exhibition Along the Water French and Dutch Impressionism. We will first learn about Impressionism and look at 4 works from the show, and then we will learn to paint like an Impressionist. First, what is Impressionism? Impressionism was founded in the 19th century. It was an artistic movement that demonstrated a style of thin, expressive brushstrokes in landscape compositions. Impressionism originated in Paris, France, by a group of artists who began to show solo exhibitions during the 1870s and 80s. The name of the style originates from a title of Claude Monet's work, Impression Soleil Levant, which translates from French to Impression Sunrise. An Impressionist artist does not try and paint real life, but tried to capture an impression of their subject, taking notice of how the light, atmosphere, season, and environment affects the scene and how it translates to the artist's own perspective. The style is not about making things look perfect or realistic, but rather painting life through its natural movement. If the wind blows on trees or water, taking notice of the shifting patterns of life. Their brush work is fast, as they try and illustrate fleeting light and natural movement. Impressionists are known to paint outside. This is formally called plein air painting. So instead of working in a studio, they work out in nature. I want to highlight a few works from the exhibition that demonstrate the techniques I have brought up.
The first work we will look at is by John Joseph Enneking, called Hillside Landscape in Spring. John Joseph Enneking is an American artist. He studied in Germany and France, where he learned to illustrate nature in its different moments. Enneking then went back to the United States, where he began to paint landscapes around New England, very similar to those that we see in our home Maine. With this image, I want to first look at the vibrancy of color, how the grass feels almost illuminated by the sun, and then we can see how the sun is pointing, or the sun is coming from rather, by the shadowed effect that kind of grazes down this hill, and that with this we're getting depth of that this is a hill and that this curves, and at the top possibly that's a little fence, and with all the rocks and all the little situated things, what seems, even with the lake in the background and the little blue mountainous range and the very vast horizon of sky and clouds, what is a very simple and beautiful composition has so much detail and so much to notice and learn from. Also, I think another very special aspect of this painting is how Enneking is situating the viewer. From the standpoint, I can imagine him painting in plein air, and as we learned, plein air meaning painting on site, Enneking, his body is looking out onto this path, and with these browns and whites mixed with the green, it's a very inviting scene. It makes me want to travel along as the hill kind of curves around to what seems to be an outlook. And again, with something simple and beautiful, you can convey so much in a landscape. And so the first question I want to ask you today is, if you had to paint a landscape, where and what would you paint it? And how, by painting in plein air, where would your body be when painting this scene? The next painting we'll look at is by Henri Edmond Joseph Cross. This is called, and excuse my French, Le Lac des Bois de Boulogne, which translates to the lake in the Bois de Boulogne. And Henri Edmond Joseph Cross was a French painter. And before we begin talking about this, I want to ask, where do you think the light is coming from? For myself, and I think based on the tracing of the patterns of light, we see that it's coming from this kind of back corner here. And in technical terms, this is called backlit. And in this painting, Cross is painting a very lively forefront. We're getting a bunch of people with this pond scene, animals. We have the swans in the lake, or in the pond rather, and the blueness of trees, that we're getting this kind of surround circular image of shadowed light. And with the light that fades in the distance, it kind of is conveying a type of day. And so the second question I want to ask you is, what time of day do you think it is? Because if it's backlit and the sun is in the background, and yet we're getting these tricklings of this kind of orange, pink, and yellow, and a lot of white brought in here, and a lot of yellow, bright yellows brought into the trees, it makes me think of a sunset or mid-afternoon when the sun isn't as bright or isn't as penetrating. And so we're getting this very deep blue effect throughout the painting. And another thing that Cross is doing in this painting is that he's incorporated the artistic style of pointillism, which is the dotted effect within the painting. And I love how, despite the kind of abstraction that comes from this little dotted effect, you're still getting a very clear sharpness, like an optical illusion of all this imagery of people and swans and lake and trees, that despite with an abstract kind of technique, you can still convey a lot of detail, just as Enninkeen did in the painting that we saw previously. And the next painting I want to look at is by Maurice Brazel Prendergast called Saint Malo. And Maurice Brazel Prendergast is an American painter. And in 1907, he traveled to France to paint the ocean shores of Europe. And this painting reminds me most of Maine. And I think that's because of this kind of muted tonality or the greenness of the ocean, of the blues and browns that kind of bring me to these coastal shores that are lined with rocks. Also, the very active wind that creates the waves and the clouds, very circular, fast motion that he's painting with. And I think this is something that is very beautiful that comes up in Impressionism, is how, these landscapes, although particular to their environment, are depicting these natural scenes that are native to many places throughout the world. So, despite this being a picture of a coastal scene in Europe, it very much reminds me of our environment in Maine. And also, again, going back to this idea of with abstract, how you're still getting very defined imagery. For instance, the little boat right here, it's not very defined as a boat, but for myself, I see a mast and I see it being carried with wind, and I see the body of the boat. Over here, another one. Perhaps this is a boat or a rock. And I think that leaves it all up for interpretation and brings in your own ideas of what a coastal shore looks like to then interpret this one. And it's as a shared experience, it's fun to find these shared experiences within a painting, within an artistic space. And another cool thing about Prendergast is that he began an exploration of post-impressionism, which was an emergent reaction against the realistic depictions of light and color that come through in impressionism. And post-impressionism thought to capture a more symbolic or abstract perspective of landscape. Post-impressionism uses more peculiar and vivid color schemes and emphasize more geometric and distorted forms of nature. And we're really getting that distortion all throughout this. It's a very, emotive kind of style of painting. And the movement was founded by Paul Cézanne, and Prendergast was one of the first Americans to embrace and adopt the methods of Cézanne and post-impressionism. And my question for you with this one is, what are the main colors that you're observing in this, and how do they relate to the other paintings? Where are the patterns that we can kind of build within this entire umbrella of impressionism that, despite each one being different, they fall within this category? And the last painting that we'll look at, which I love as a contrast and a comparison to the one we just saw, is by Eugene Louis Bodin, called, again, excuse my French, Port of Le Havre. And Eugene Louis Bodin is a French Impressionist painter. And this is a very dear scene to Boudin because his father kept his ship at the port of Le Havre, which was a coastal port in Normandy, France, and Boudin was raised in this town. And what I love about this painting, again, as a contrasting one to the one that we saw before, that they're both depicting ocean and ships kind of scenes, but this one is very detailed and yet is an impressionist painting. We're getting a lot of imagery, a lot of detail, a lot of little things that are creating this very individual kind of experience of this place. And I love how there's this looming storm that comes in with this dark color and yet a very delicate, distinct lightness and blue that comes in this top corner. And yet they're all kind of merging into one to create a very coherent scene. And how, the smoke here kind of leads us into the darkness effect here. And yet there's still so much white throughout it. Despite being a more dark scene to the other ones that we've seen, we're still getting a very light of a lot of white within this painting, despite all the dark tones. And my last question is, now that we've seen a couple of Impressionism paintings, can you identify 3 characteristics that are very important to Impressionism and that we've seen throughout all of these? This could be about the color that we've seen, what people are using with greens and blues, if water is depicted as more green or more blue, or the strokes that they're using. We've seen a dotted effect to create the painting, or you've seen like very loose, unrigid effect, or more rigid. However, they're all within, again, this Impressionism schema.
Now it's time for the activity. For this activity, you'll need acrylic paint or any water-soluble watercolor or any paint, cardstock paper or canvas, a bunch of leaves, rubber bands or strings, scissors, wax paper or a palette, and paper towels. I want you all to connect with being outside, so instead of using regular paintbrushes, we're going to use leaf brushes. So the first thing we'll do is make our leaf paintbrushes. We're going to take a couple of leaves, the dry or fresh, whatever you prefer, and I'm going to fold it like this and kind of make a little bundle with it, and take any rubber band or hair tie and go like this. And unfortunately, today is exceptionally cold, so we are making do with a photograph that we have of lovely Bowdoin's quad, and we will be demonstrating indoors. And to kind of make it more paintbrush-like, you can cut little slits throughout your leaves. Might be a little messy. Just kind of bundle it up. And so we're going to be looking at all the colors in the painting, and I have my primary colors right here: red, blue, yellow, and white. White's not a primary color, but will help us. And I think first I'm going to paint the sky, so I'm going to take a little blue and a little white. And what's great about the leaf paintbrush is that it gives us naturally this kind of fast stroke that appears in Impressionist painting. So we're getting a lot of blue over here. And what's fun about the leaves is that you can't really undo the colors that you have on it, so you just have to further mix. I'm going to make some green, put some yellow and blue together, maybe add a tad bit of red to give it some depth, kind of get on the grass. And as we see, there's a lot more orange there, so I'm going to take some of the red and yellow. I'm going to kind of make that leaf motion that's kind of coming down from all the trees. And we're getting a lot of orange up here, so I'm going to mix some of that together. Go like that. It's a very autumn time color palette. I'm going to kind of use all the paint on my leaves to create this very movement-like image. Got my tree up here. And then if I want, I can go back in and refine with an actual paintbrush to kind of get everything down that I want. But for right now, to just establish all your colors on your thing with the leaf, and then you can always discard this leaf and make a new leaf paintbrush. You kind of bundle these together, take the hair tie again, And this is a process that's meant to be messy and meant to have a lot of fun with. Again, possibly your leaves won't be as dry as ours, depending on the season you do them in. But, you know, we're all just kind of working what we have, kind of getting my clouds in here. And it's fun because it teaches you that you can really paint with anything. And yeah, this is the starting point of something that could be very beautiful and very fun. It's a good way to get out of your element and comfort zone with painting and art and do something a little more experimental. So, and voila, this is the beginning of my of my Bowdoin masterpiece.